what I think we will do...
Recording is on.
Brilliant. What we will do then is we will get started, if that's all right. We've got a couple more people in the room. So I will just bring this screen up so that everybody can see. So just to remind everybody, we are recording the session, and if you can, please keep yourself on mute whilst we're doing the presentation. We're going to have some time for questions at the end. So if you want to put your questions up in the discussion, either as we're going, we'll go back through, or as once we kind of get to the end and you want to have a bit of you can put your question up then, and we can go through the questions then, and we'll go through them in order. So I hope everybody can see that slide that's on screen at the moment, which is outlining that this is the AHP breakout session, and what we're talking about is what is the fuss about research. Somebody could just tell me if that is what everybody can see?
Yes, Vicky.
Excellent, lovely. So you've got the three of us presenting and talking to you today. So you've got myself, Dr. Vicky Booth, we've got Dr. Alison Cowley, and we have Dr. Katie Robinson. So just before we all introduce ourselves, so that should have moved on to an overview slide. Is that correct?
Yes.
Brilliant. So we're going to do a few introductions so that you're going to be able to see us and hear us and know who we are a little bit more. And then we will move on to talking about what is research and kind of going through some of the differences between research and service evaluation and audit, just because that's one of the main questions that gets asked of us guys as AHP clinical academic leads for NUH. We're then going to very briefly touch on some of the clinical academic careers for AHPs, but you've already had quite a really nice overview of it. So what we'll focus more on are kind of next steps and things that you guys can be doing rather than the overall pathway. All right. So let's get started by introducing ourselves. So the screen is going to stay on the slide, but I'm going to hand over to Dr. Katie Robinson, if that is all right, Katie. And if you can start talking, that would be fantastic.
More than happy to start talking, Vicky. You know that. So, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Lovely. So yeah, I'm Katie Robinson. I'm a physio by background. And Vicky's put up what I am. So I currently hold one of the NHR Advanced Fellowships. So that's a postdoc fellowship. And that's around for 5 years, which is quite scary, around implementation of falls. So my background, is everything okay, Kirsty? Or?
Yeah,
yes, it's fine. Sorry, it's all fine.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so my background is sort of older people, rehabilitation and more community. And I also have a contract at the university as a senior research fellow. Am I handing over to Alison, Vicky?
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Alison, would you like to go next?
Yeah, of course I can. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Alison Cowley. I have a number of roles at the moment. I completed my PhD just over a year ago now. I have one post where I am one of the allied health professional clinical academic leads alongside Vicky and Katie. I also work in the Institute of Care Excellence, which is the nursing and midwifery, as a practice development lead in research and innovation, and I hold an honorary clinical professor post in the University of Nottingham. And I too am a physio, and my particular interest is complex rehab interventions, acute frailty, and how we manage frailty pre and post surgery.
Excellent, thank you. And myself, so I am Vicky Booth. As Tom and Claire mentioned, I currently hold one of the NIHR postdoctoral awards, so one of the ICA clinical lectureships, which is slightly different to Katie's advanced fellowship, but it's both our postdoctoral awards. And I hold that between the University of Nottingham, where I work as an assistant professor in the School of Medicine, and alongside my work with NHS Trust as one of the AHP clinical academic leads alongside Katie and Alison. I'm a neurophysio by trade and currently working within stroke, although mostly in the out of hours rotas. And my research is focused around neurological impairment. So my PhD was in dementia and exercise and kind of rehabilitation in those early stages of cognitive impairment. I'm also the current hub lead for the East Midlands branch of the Council for AHPs in research, and that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about kind of in next steps, just to kind of give you a bit of that sort of background about what other people can get, what you can get involved in if you've got an interest in research and doing a bit more. So I'm going to hand over to Alison now for her to go on to this next bit.
Thank you, Vicky. What I also needed to add as well that I also held one of the NIHR CDRF, so the PhD funded fellowship. So if anyone is interested in them, give me a shout and I can share my experiences of completing them. So what is research? It's something that we all hear about, we should all know about, but quite often understanding the difference between research, service evaluation, audit and clinical practice and is critical and where they overlap. Next slide, please. So just thinking about the differences, so at the top we've got little parts to kind of match them all up. So the measures against a standard tends to sit alongside audit. Whoops, it moved around, okay. Involves an intervention, any choice of intervention, treatment or care based on best evidence or professional consensus. Okay, and pop that one into place, Vicky. That is clinical practice. So something that aims to devise generalisable or transferable new knowledge to answer specific research questions with sound methods is sit alongside research. And the final one, in case you've not guessed, is service evaluation, which defines or judges current interventions not against a standard. So the reason why we're saying those is that quite often we think that one is more valuable than the other, but in reality for our clinical practice we need all four of those components to ensure that we are delivering the best possible clinical care. Next slide, Vicky. So what is the fuss about doing research? Well, research, it seeks to develop new knowledge. And it isn't new knowledge for the sake of new knowledge. It's for us as clinicians to identify how we can provide the best possible care and outcomes for our patients, but also for our carers, family members and staff. It should seek to improve practice. So all clinical guidelines that we work from should be built on evidence, not just on, well, this is the way that we've always done it. The reason why we wanted to highlight the importance of audit and evaluation is that they're often the first steps as clinicians in our research journey, that if we aspire to become academics or clinical academics, quite often it's audit, evaluation, small service improvement or quality improvement projects that actually get us involved and whet our appetites. But what I would like to say is that those transferable skills around being robust, systematic, using methods are exactly the same that you would use in your practice, audit and evaluation that you would in research. And the reason why it's important that we get involved is, as clinicians, we probably know the most important questions to ask. We're the ones who are working with patients, with family members, with carers, with other clinicians. So often we generate really valuable clinical questions. Why does this work? Why doesn't this work? Is this one treatment better than another? Or why does this one work and this one doesn't? And actually it makes us better practitioners, as you will see with the next slide. So for those of you who've seen me talk before, I really like this slide. It's around the evidence-based practice stall, and it's something that has come from nursing and midwifery colleagues, but it's really useful. So evidence-based practice, evidence-based nursing, evidence-based medicine, whichever one we want to replace practice with, is held up by three key components which are critical to our work. Number one is our clinical experience. Number two are patient preferences, the needs, wants, what they expect. But then the other pillar is clinical research. And all three of those legs are what give us our evidence-based practice. And without one, the stool will fall over. So often the first thing people will come to me in our research clinics or in our practice and say, I've got this question, or I want to know why this is happening, but I'm not interested in research. I don't do research. To which I challenge them and say, research is everybody's business, because our clinical practice, our evidence-based working, our clinical reasoning is based upon these three key components. So if people say to you, I don't do research, I would challenge them to say, you may not need to do the research, but you still need to understand how research is generated and what the results are and how they can be applied to improve your clinical outcomes for your patients. Next slide. Okay, so this is another way of demonstrating that, but key in that part is about how we implement and sustain that. So long gone are the days, hopefully, where we have academics working in the university and doing amazing pieces of research which don't get implemented into practice and be sustained. And I think that's where clinical academics and clinicians who are research active clinicians can have a particular strong impact on how we understand what the best available evidence is and how we can implement that into our clinical practice. Okay. So, next slide.
Brilliant, thanks Alison. So from Claire's talk earlier, she spoke quite a bit about this ICA, this integrated clinical academic pathway. And one of the main funders of clinical academics, and as AHPs interested in research, this is one of our kind of main and biggest funders, mainly because they offer such substantial funding, because they fund people's salaries to be able to gain their research qualifications. And that's kind of their business, is they're focused around an academy. So that's focused around training, and when you become, or if you get some funding from the NIHR, then you become a member of that academy. And as Claire was saying, the whole point of what they're looking at is trying to fund people, professionals, healthcare professionals, social care professionals, to be able to get some research training and to be able to get those qualifications. So if you're interested in gaining further research qualifications, and my next slide will kind of break that down a little bit more, then this is really one of the first places to go to have a really good look at. It's not the only funder, and it's not the only route, and they call it a pathway, but it doesn't actually mean that once you're on one step, it means that you go automatically to the next. But it's a structure and it's a framework to help us all understand this kind of career pathway a little bit more. So the link is there, but also at the bottom of the breakout room session, you'll notice that there's a section on resources and there's a PDF there. So the slides from today and from this breakout session are there, but there's also a PDF that has some of these links on it, and that link is there as well. So that's the first place to look. And as you scroll down the page, what you'll see is that there are the different kind of stages of the pathway are there. So let's have a look at those qualifications, really. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about research training and research qualifications, but that's not only be part of being a research active clinician. That's just a qualification element, but let's just spend a minute just talking about that. So you've got your pre-PhD qualifications, which most often are either a Masters of Arts, Masters in Research Methods, or a Masters of Science. You then have your doctoral training, so your PhD, and you then have kind of 2 layers of postdoctoral kind of training or fellowships or kind of elements. So the clinical lectureships as part of the ICA pathway is split into clinical lectureships and senior clinical lectureships. And the difference tends to be those that are between 0 and 5 years past PhD and 5+ years past PhD. And then moving on from that, you have your chairs or your professorial positions. So it's quite important, and definitely when I got involved in kind of knowing more about research training and research qualifications and things, I definitely felt like gaining a PhD was the kind of pinnacle of where I wanted to be as a clinical academic. And I think it's quite interesting that when you look at that diagram, you'll notice that the PhD is only that second step along. There's this whole other expanded element, and from an academic sense, gaining a PhD is part of the foundation training of being an academic. So it's worthwhile considering that whole breadth of that pathway. So this is just a slightly broken down version of the diagrams that you've seen before in Claire's talk and in Rachel's talk. So the pink ones on there are the non-medics. So as AHPs, these are the ones that are specifically ring-fenced for people like ourselves. So as we heard about the PCAF, the CDRF, and then the clinical lectureships and senior clinical lectureships. And the idea is that they are training awards that allow you to either get your master's, PhD, or those kind of postdoctoral positions. But they're not the only ones, and that was kind of hinted about a little bit, in that the NIHR also fund everybody else as well. So they fund scientists and doctors and dentists. And you can see that in the green, they're the ones that are open, and they're the awards that are open for everybody. So they're matched at the same levels, but they've got slightly different titles and slightly different terms that are used. So if you think about it, a biomedical scientist is quite a different person to a speech and language therapist or an occupational therapist that works in clinical practice for 5 days a week. And so that's why they have these different programs and slightly different awards and training awards. So then you also have the NIHR awards that are available for just doctors and dentists. And one of the reasons why the NIHR have done this is because they know that health professionals get their training because they want to be a health professional. I trained to be a physiotherapist because I wanted to be a physiotherapist. And that we're working clinically. And so trying to get these additional research qualifications and training programs can be quite difficult. So that's why they've got that dedicated ICA pathway. There's, alongside these training awards, the NIHR also fund more infrastructure, and that's kind of what that blue element there is. And Rachel kind of touched on these as other areas where you can go for funding. So here at Nottingham, and you will have noticed that this event is badged under our BRC, our Biomedical Research Centre, because Nottingham is a host of a biomedical research centre. We have our Nottingham BRC, and it's through that organisation that we're able to run these events, such as these training events and Research Futures, as that expanded programme goes over the next couple of years. But there are also the applied research collaborations, so the ARCs, and as Rachel was saying, these are other areas where you can look at funding for either at that pre-PhD, doctoral and kind of postdoctoral levels of funding for your training. There are also charity funding as well, because charities know that they want to improve the evidence and they want to support their particular patient populations. So the MS Society, the Alzheimer's Society, the Stroke Association, there are lots and lots of different charities which want to support researchers in getting their research qualifications. So, for example, I got my PhD through a clinical training fellowship with the Alzheimer's Society, because my PhD was very much focused on developing exercise within dementia. So, alongside this NIHR pathway of being able to fund your training, your research training, or your research development, then there are kind of these charity awards that are also available. The levels of funding are quite often quite different though. And so the NIHR, we tend to use the phrase of it being our gold standard, because we know that it funds your time and your salary. And as a clinician, we are quite reasonably paid. We're in very secure roles, we're in quite secure jobs. And so being able, handing our notice in to go and do a PhD isn't always an attractive offer. And quite often the charity PhDs or the charity fundings, because it's charity and they want to, they have to justify their costs in slightly different ways, then it's quite often only a stipend or a minimum kind of amount that you'd get for doing those training awards. But hopefully that just gives you a bit of that kind of, a bit more explanation of that. And as AHPs, these charity awards are actually, and these kind of charities and these other funders are just as valuable for us as AHPs as the NIHR awards are. So Claire did a great job of talking through the different levels of the Health Education East Midlands Awards. So she mentioned that there are these bridging awards that are designed to help people to do their applications for these master's level, these PhD levels, or these postdoc levels. And I myself am a alumni. I used that phrase earlier, so I'm going to use it again. I'm an alumni of the postdoctoral fellowship bridging award, and I use that to help me do the application for my current award. And so those bridging awards are designed to work alongside the pathway, but there's no reason why those awards can't be used to apply for these other areas, such as the BRCs, the ARCs, and other kind of charities. So that's kind of a little bit about training, and we're going to finish our whole kind of presentation a little bit early, because what we want to do is be able to open up the floor and to be able to have a bit of discussion and for people to be able to ask questions. So I'm just warning you of that one as well. So next steps then. So we've spoken a bit about what research is and kind of difference between research and evaluation and audit. We've spoken about getting training and the qualifications that you might want to kind of get into to help expand your knowledge on research methods and research skills. But the whole point about a clinical academic career or a clinical academic post is that we are doing research in practice for practice. And so you need that balance of skill, in that I definitely was very aware that from my physiotherapy training, I didn't actually know how to be a physiotherapist by going to university. It was once I was a junior physio and I was working that then those skills actually start to be more meaningful and start to actually kind of make sense. And it's exactly the same when we're talking about research skills as well. So all the things that we do within our usual day, within our clinical practice, are invaluable, and we should be thinking about that from a research perspective as well as from a clinical perspective. And I'm fully signed up to Alison's evidence-based practice stall. It's that's changed my life, definitely. So anyway, here we've got just a few of those sort of next steps about what you could be doing if you are either interested in having a clinical academic career, or you're interested in getting more involved in research or being more research active. So you can see that we've got a lot of the professional bodies and their logos up on that slide. So for example, the CSP have some small project money. They have different organisations that are involved in research. So CAPRA covers all the different professional bodies as well, and it's meant as a whole AHP-wide organisation. But it's worthwhile having a look at your professional body website and having a look at what research activities they offer. Quite often they have special interest groups, or they might have a special research society. They might have a Twitter group, or they might have a Facebook group. I don't think any have yet moved into Instagram, but they're definitely all on Twitter. And Twitter as well is another good place to start looking at other people, other clinicians in your area, in your profession, or in your patient groups that are being research active. What are they doing? Can you talk to them over Twitter? Quite often that's a good place where people are starting to promote their research publications or their findings, and it's a great way to get more involved with either other clinicians or sometimes patient groups as well. So PPI isn't on there, but if you're particularly interested in developing your own research projects, your own research proposals, then as a clinician, in a way, you are a professional representative, but you might want to talk to patients or kind of other people that you might want to be involved, or that might have a kind of a stake in what it is that you're thinking about or wanting to get involved in. And as a trust, we have a patient and public involvement representative. Katie Frost is fantastic and is really approachable. So if you're either thinking about developing your own project, or you've heard about some research and you want to be able to talk to some of our other kind of PPI reps or PPI people, then she's a good person to talk to. I just realised that that's not on that slide. So there are lots of other ways that you can get involved. You can be looking at articles, at doing journal clubs, looking at doing audits within your clinical practice, looking at service evaluations, looking at clinical guidelines. And there's lots of resources out there about how to either get these set up in your clinical areas, or about how to kind of get involved in others that are already going on. And CAPRA have a really nice top 10 tips kind of sites where they have lots of leaflets where you can look at, and for example, one of them is about starting a journal club. And as Alison was saying, it's not just about doing research, it's about understanding what the evidence is and being able to implement that into your clinical area. And that might be by doing an audit to find out, well, what am I already doing? Are we already meeting guidelines, or are we not? And those journal clubs don't have to be about looking at really kind of high level publications. It might be about trying to understand the clinical guidelines a little bit more, or trying to unpick them, or even looking at the evidence behind those clinical guidelines. If you're at all interested in having a bit of a go and kind of saying, okay, well, actually, what might a research position look like, then there are always research positions or research assistant jobs, research fellow jobs, kind of clinical advisory roles that are being sought. So there's an opportunity there to be getting a secondment, to be able to be doing a couple of hours additional or kind of different outside of your clinical role, to be working on a research project. It could be a secondment for a fixed period of time, or it could be a slight change in hours to be able to do that. So after I did my master's, I came back to my neuro-rotational role, but on a part-time basis, so that I could be doing a research assistant role for the other half of my week, which I found really invaluable and really kind of spurred me on to want to do my PhD. If you're thinking about those kind of things, then having a look at doing your good clinical practice training is kind of one of the first steps, and that's a free online training that you can do either as a study leave thing, or kind of do over a weekend, or it's something that actually you're able to get as a qualification, because any kind of research role will be looking to see if somebody has that qualification or has that understanding. So that's the GCP training, the Good Clinical Practice training. And to get the ball rolling with any of this is we would strongly advise that you talk to people, and you can talk to us. So you can talk to myself or Alison or Katie as the clinical academic leads for AHPs within the trust. You can also talk to your team, talk to your direct line manager, talk to the others in your team about research, about evidence, around what's happening. You can look on the trust site about research futures as well. So that's an element that's purely for you guys at NUH that is starting to offer some more training on research skills. So as Tom mentioned, we're looking at doing some grant writing and some publication boot camps and some other things. So that's a definite place to start looking at. But really, if you start talking to people about research, and that starts they then know that that's something that you're interested in, either, as we're saying, being research active, and by talking about it, you're making it less scary in a way, really, because it's not scary. It's what we should be doing. It's kind of part of us and our clinical practice, in that the interventions that we're doing, the processes that we go through, should all have that evidence base, as Alison was talking about. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to stop sharing the screens. Stop sharing my slides in a minute. But just wanted to bring this last bit up, in that you'll see our email addresses are there. I think also on the breakout room, our email addresses are linked on there as well. We do have an inbox where the three of us look at the emails regularly, which if you're more than welcome to email. And we also have not only our own personal Twitter accounts, but we have the NUH Research AHPs Twitter account too. So I shall stop sharing and come back to the room. Brilliant. So what I'm going to do is bring this through into that we've got a toggle view, so that everybody who's got their camera on, or everybody that's in the room, can see everybody else. So did we have any questions come up in the discussion?
I don't think so. There weren't questions, just comments. Oh, how can you help me from where I'm at? I do not have a BSc degree yet. So it's from Chisa. Wendy, do you want to, how can you help me please from where I'm at? I don't have a BSc degree yet. What would be my pathway so I could apply for a training opportunity? Are you on?
I'm on now, please. Thank you.
Hi, do you want to just introduce yourself, and then we might be able to respond to that question and help. Hi.
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 Sorry, just say that again, please. Sorry.
Sorry, do you want to just ask the question? Is it you haven't got your BSc degree yet? Are you currently completing your degree?
I'm working as a renal technologist at Nottingham University Hospitals. I'm currently doing a renal technology course at University of Bradford.
Okay.
And I just say part-time for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I intend to proceed from there to do a bachelor's degree in biomedical science. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So
you're right.
I just
sorry,
yes,
it keeps going.
Yes, please. So, my concern actually is I would like to know in relation to what we're talking about, how far, I mean, what's the pathway for me to get to the point where I'm able to do a research to qualify for the what's on offer like you've been presenting today.
Okay, so for the NIHR training, people need to have, particularly for the integrated clinical academic, people need to be a registered healthcare professional. So be that with the Healthcare Professions Council. Now, if you're going down the healthcare scientist route, we do have healthcare scientist leads who are Carolyn Costigan and Richard Simpson, because I know it's slightly different for healthcare scientists. So I don't have the answer to that one directly, but Carolyn and Richard will. But for the NIHR opportunities, they do expect that you would have a degree, an undergraduate degree, before you can apply for them. But I can definitely pop you in contact with Carolyn and Richard if that would be helpful.
Yes, please. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll pop their email addresses in the chat.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. So I can't see that anybody else has put a question up so far. I just saw a hand raised. Go on then, Gillian. Go for it.
Hi, Gillian.
Hi. It's a wee bit specific, I think, but I was looking at the postdoctoral bridging award, and I think everybody seems to think I'm eligible. But I've just completed a feasibility study, and I noticed that it did say that the ultimate clinical fellowship did include some research costs, but I just wondered what that would amount to, you know, because I was going on to look at an RCT.
Katie, did you want to answer that one from your experience?
Sorry, Gillian, are you asking the bridging funding at the gold level?
No, not so much for that, but ultimately you're looking at getting a postdoctoral clinical fellowship, you might have thought.
Yes.
And it seems to indicate that there is some research funding within it, but I just wonder at what level, you know.
Yeah, I think it depends which one you go for. So as we've said before, Vicky has the clinical lectureship and I have the advanced fellowship. So they fund slightly different things and for slightly different durations. So mine is 5 years and it's full salary backfill and I guess it's more of a pure academic fellowship. And within that, I can put research support roles for up to 3 years. I don't know if the guidance has changed, that's what it was. So I have a job out to advert now, if anyone is interested, for a clinical researcher to also undertake a PhD alongside that in that role. So in terms of research support costs, that I could put that in the advanced fellowship and that was funded. And because we're trying to increase the AHP research support in NUH, I put a AHP or nurse role in NUH funded at a band 6 level within that for my research support. I don't know if the guidance has changed on that because the advanced fellowship round that I went for was the first one. And I don't think they fully understood what they were asking for at that point. But it does allow those kind of research costs in mine. And you can look at the service support cost element, as you would do with any research grant, you have to cost that as well. But there isn't, and you can as long as you can justify the cost, you can put most costs in. It's just, what type of research costs would you be looking to put in yours?
Well, I'm meeting somebody from CPN next week, but probably, I mean, you're looking for staffing costs for obviously all of it really, unless I can find funding from somewhere else, and then I don't know whether to go down that route anyway.
Well, so I guess it's thinking as well. So the idea behind the fellowships and the lectureships is that they are also developing you as a person within that. So they are not just research grants. So if you wanted the research doing it, and you wanted to lead that and you didn't necessarily need to be doing that, you could look at a research grant such as like research for patient benefit type side. Whereas obviously the fellowship idea is that it's a training program for you. So obviously it covers your salary, And then the support role in mine is to help with the research, but also to develop somebody else in that. So I think it's worth thinking through what it is you want to do with the money, if you know what I mean, and what it is.
Yeah, the fellowship's really attractive as an individual, but sort of like, you know, do you want to do that?
Yes, and it does have, you know, has advantages and disadvantages, because obviously you, like you said, a lot of the research in the fellowship you have to do yourself, because so, you know, there's an element. And I think the way I try to do it in my fellowship, just from my own experience, is having that support role. It could develop somebody else, but it could also help me to put a more ambitious project in that could be done with the support of somebody else, just as you would cost in. I know Vicky, for example, has costed in qualitative expertise in her lectureship, but there is an expectation, particularly at my level. I applied for the advanced fellowship as a new, very recent PhD completion, that you are also still developing your own research skills by undertaking, you know. So I'm currently screening 13,000 papers, for example. So yeah, there's an element of you doing the research yourself. So I think it's working out what you want that pot of money to do for you, if that makes sense.
Okay.
The only other bit of advice as well, Gillian, with that is that you might think that your next step is an RCT, but actually when you look at what you actually know and what you would need to know for an RCT, just because you've done a feasibility study doesn't mean that your next step is an RCT. So I think Rachel was kind of there representing the RDS. That would definitely be where I would be going next if you're considering what method it is that you're going to be including. Because and I know from talking to a colleague that's also kind of applying for these postdoctoral things, and that he thought that he'd be going straight for an RCT, and he hasn't. He's gone for a pilot study needs to be done before he goes for the RCT. So talk to RDS, definitely.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
So thinking as well for any of you who might be even pre-masters, pre-PhD, I think kind of top tips are, number one, that we hold monthly research clinics for AHPs, where you can book in and talk through your individual needs with myself, Katie, or Vicky. And one thing that I would really say is that I think as clinicians, we kind of see people in universities, or we read their papers and we think, oh, you know, I'm really interested in what they've got to say, but I'm not going to contact them. But in my experience, academics are some of the most generous people with their time. And they are always really keen to speak with clinicians and support aspiring clinical academics. So if there's someone out there and you think, I love their work, I'm really interested in it, don't be afraid to drop them an email and start those conversations, because they are so generous with their time and really keen to support, would be my call. And we've got amazing academics and clinical academics in Nottingham, but think big, think big and beyond Nottingham too.
Brilliant. Katie, would you have any has anybody else got a question? If anybody else has a question, then please shout up. If not, hello. Go on, Chris.
Hi.
Thanks, Chris. You saved me there. Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm just a little bit confused by the pathway kind of after you kind of get out of the kind of the clinical lectureships, firstly, like how long they last for, and then the pathway afterwards. Because when I'm like looking at jobs, I can see clinical psychologist jobs, and I can see research assistant, research fellow jobs, and I don't know who's paying for clinical research at the end. Like, who pays? Is it both organizations? What's the end goal? What's the like bit afterwards, after you graduate from the clinical lectureships?
That is it. That's an absolutely great question, Chris. And I can see Katie kind of nodding her head, going along, and we all are, because it's not a simple thing, and it's not I think as AHPs, we're all very used to the fact that there is a role that is there that we can step into or that we can apply for, and that isn't the same with a clinical academic career, because in essence you are creating what it is that you're wanting. It does get quite complicated, because what you're asking for is which organisation or which organisation is funding what part of the role it is that you want. So NUH has been fantastic at supporting non-medics in having this research time and this clinical academic time, and Katie, Alison and I are kind of examples of kind of how the Trust is willing to support clinicians and non-medics doing research time. However, if you want to be doing research within your organisation for your patient group that's within that trust, okay? So, but if what you're wanting to be doing is kind of your own projects and your own development and your own teaching and your own kind of those sorts of roles, then that's kind of more funded through the higher education institutes, so the universities or the colleges or those organisations. And so quite often the clinical academic roles aren't just funded by one organisation, they're funded through multiple elements or through multiple parts of projects that kind of feed and which kind of bring in together. And all three of us, Alison, Katie and I, are all kind of multiple funded. We don't just have a single kind of person supporting the role that we do over the 5 days of the week. Alison and Katie, have you got anything to add to that?
I mean, it's the ultimate question, and I think the pathway is really good on the page, and it's worked and it does help people at various points. But it is that bit afterwards that now actually, even in NHR, we're looking at a lot more. I think about what do they do and how do they support people. So I guess if we're going for in terms of my tips and things, that would be kind of one of them. That it is a bit messy, this world. So it's sort of working out how messy you're prepared for it to be for you and what you feel comfortable with. That would be one of my top tips, because I have multiple contracts. I have a short-term contract with the university that will come to an end. I have an NUH it's working out which bit you like the most and where you want your focus to be. So the best thing about this type of career is you can do that. You can carve that out yourself. You can develop your own world within this. But equally with that comes a bit of mess around it. So I think it's working out for you which organisations you wanted to be involved with and where you wanted that to sit, and then you have to approach them and carve that out for yourself. There isn't a pathway at that point, I would say, if we're all being completely honest.
And that might not be an organisation that you're currently working for or that you're currently kind of involved with.
Yeah, but the other thing from a more positive point of view is that people do want clinical academics working in their organisations, and they do want these skills, and they do want, particularly the NHR fellowships are well thought of. It gives kudos to an organisation. So if you're applying for those things, people will be interested in you and will want to support you. It's not the other way around where you think you're asking a lot from people. You are actually, they are interested in this, because it brings quite a lot of kudos to their organisation as well to have you with them.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie. Siobhan, you put your hand up.
Yeah, so I'd basically, to lead on from that, because obviously the three of you are physios and Nottingham University has a physio school, so speech therapy isn't at Nottingham University. So how easy would that be for us? And I know I've got Becca, who is obviously at the postdoctorate level. So how easy is it then? Do we have to kind of make links with Sheffield, for instance, or De Montfort?
I think, well, neither myself, Vicky, nor Katie, although Katie did her undergraduate degree in Nottingham, we haven't been in the School of Health Sciences. We've been in the School of Medicine. So a lot of the work that we have done has been multidisciplinary, but in medicine and not in health sciences. So I think yes, there are growing opportunities for speech and language therapists, but it's about how you start to have those discussions across multiple organisations. And I think it's kind of getting away from the thinking about the profession per se, but thinking about your patient group or or the disease. So, for example, my PhD supervisory team, I didn't have a physio on it. I had an OT, a nurse and a medic were my PhD supervisors because they were the topic and the method area. So not having a school of speech and language therapy in Nottingham doesn't mean that you can't pursue your clinical academic career within Nottingham. It might just mean that you need to then start having links out with Sheffield, with Leicester. And speech and language are particularly active on Twitter and these things, and seem to have a really good network, being a small profession.
And we obviously have had therapists being supported in Nottingham to do their PhDs. We've had 3 in recent years, obviously, with Becca, Julie and Lisa. So the other question I have around that is, I was in the same year as Katie, and we did our MARM together. But for those people, because it looks incredibly competitive now, and that's going to put some people off. So it's kind of what you're doing for the people in between who want to be research active, but not necessarily go through all the hoops in terms of becoming, applying for PhDs, but want to do research or be linked in with research programs as part of their everyday jobs?
Really, really good question. And I think some of that will start to be addressed in the forthcoming AHP strategy, which went to AHP board last month and hopefully will be ratified this month. And within that, research active clinicians and clinical academic careers, but also involvement in research delivery and implementation. It's a critical component. So I think it's something that's been gradually building, but the strategy, and with Miriam Duffy now coming into post, I think there will be those opportunities as to how we can encourage, as you say, some people don't want to do a master's, some people don't want to do a PhD, but as we said, research is everybody's business, be it generating it, leading it, but actually appraising it and implementing it. So I can't tell you the answer now, but there are plans afoot, and research active and interested clinicians will hopefully be pleased with.
And I think in the NHS as well, with retention and recruitment becoming a real issue, actually people really, really want to do this as part of their everyday job, whether that is supported service valuations and audit, but more importantly, contributing to the research in their own, with the patients that they see.
That's what it's about, Sian. And I think some of these funding opportunities are competitive, but being research active for yourself in your role isn't. There are lots and lots and lots of ways, and that honestly, talking and saying that you want to be doing more research in your area or implementing this bit of evidence that you've seen in your practice, there's no competition with that. You can all it's something that we should all be doing as part of our role, and hasn't, but that's something that we should be changing and moving away from. Yeah, so it's going against some funding can be competitive, can be difficult, but we're all trying to make the best care for our patients. There's nothing to compete against by doing that. So I've just noticed that the conclusion, we're meant to go back to a conclusion into the main keynote room. So if there are any further questions that people haven't had a chance to ask us in this session, then please drop either myself, Katie, or Alison an email. I put the link to the research clinic up there as well, but there's also in the resources the research clinic links there, so that's you can choose a time to come and talk to us, or just drop us an email. We are very, very, very approachable. So talk about anything from postdocs to reading an article to anything. Even just general chit chat is great.
Just gin or wine or what?
All right, brilliant. Okay then, guys. So if you want to head back to the keynote room, that would be fantastic. Thanks all.